The electromagnetic storm had been raging for 3 days around the outer monitoring arrays, making David Reynolds question whether he should have taken the night shift rotation. His fingers moved across the console with practiced ease, filtering out the cosmic static that threatened to overwhelm their sensitive equipment. The deep space listening post existed for one purpose: to catch any signal that didn't belong to human civilization. Most nights brought nothing but the usual background noise of a living galaxy. Pulsars spinning their ancient rhythms, solar winds, whistling between star systems, and the occasional burst of radiation from some distant stellar catastrophe. David had grown comfortable with these cosmic sounds over his 5 years stationed at the edge of human space. They were predictable, natural, safe. The signal that pierced through the storm at 347 hours was none of those things. At first, David thought his equipment had malfunctioned. The waveform that appeared on his screens defied every pattern he knew. It wasn't the structured mathematics of human communication, nor did it match any natural phenomenon in their databases. The frequency shifted in ways that seemed almost musical, rising and falling with what could only be described as desperation. He called for Dr. Amy Foster, the linguistics specialist who somehow managed to make sense of Earth's hundreds of languages and dialects. She arrived within minutes, her hair still messy from sleep but her eyes sharp with curiosity. Together they watched as the signal repeated every 17 minutes, each transmission slightly weaker than the last. "It's definitely artificial," Amy said after running the data through her analysis programs. "Look at these mathematical constants, embedded in the pattern. They're using prime numbers and geometric sequences as a universal language base. This is someone trying very hard to be understood." The breakthrough came on the 4th day when Amy's team managed to isolate the mathematical framework from the actual message content. What they found made everyone in the listening post gather around the main screen in stunned silence. The signal wasn't random noise or simple mathematics. It was a language, complex and sophisticated, built around concepts that human minds could barely grasp. But they could understand enough. Key phrases began to emerge from the static like islands rising from a digital ocean. "Help us," "dying world," "warrior species," and most unsettling of all, "third planet from yellow star." The aliens knew about Earth, they knew about humanity, and they were asking for help. Amy worked without sleep for another 2 days, her team rotating in shifts to maintain the translation effort. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged from the desperate transmissions. The beings calling themselves the Kalen lived on a world they named New Sanctuary, located in what humans called the Kepler system. Their planet was under attack by something they called the Dominion of Ash, and they were losing badly. The Kalen described themselves as builders and healers, a people who had never known war until the Dominion ships appeared in their skies. Their cities were burning, their people were being taken, and their ancient knowledge was being destroyed for what the attackers called sport. The word translated poorly, but Amy's team gathered it meant something like hunting for entertainment, rather than survival. What made David's blood run cold was how the Kalen had learned about humanity. According to their transmissions, they had found ruins on their world left by an ancient race. These precursors had been watching Earth for thousands of years, studying human civilization and behavior. In their records, humanity was described as the warrior guardians of the third rock, and those who fight hardest when protecting others. The aliens weren't just asking for help. They were specifically asking for human help, because someone long ago had identified humanity as a species that would respond to calls for aid with overwhelming force. David sent the translated messages through encrypted channels to Earth Command, knowing that what he was reporting would change everything. For the first time in human history, they had proof of intelligent alien life. But these aliens weren't coming in peace or bringing advanced technology as gifts. They were refugees fleeing genocide, and they believed humans were their only hope. The response from Earth came faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours, Captain Rick Torres was being briefed at the Luna Naval Academy, while his crew prepared the exploration vessel Defiant for immediate departure. Colonel Beth Hayes canceled her leave to assemble a Marine detachment. Chief Engineer Tom Park was pulled from his research project to outfit the ship with humanity's most advanced technology. Dr. Lisa Wang packed her xenobiology equipment, knowing she might be the first human to study alien life in person. The Defiant launched from Earth orbit 72 hours after David first detected the signal. As the ship engaged its hyperdrive for the 47-day journey to the Kepler system, every person aboard understood they were carrying the hopes of two species. Behind them, Earth's military began the largest mobilization in human history, preparing for a war against an enemy they had never seen. David remained at his post, continuing to monitor the weakening transmissions from New Sanctuary. Each day brought fewer signals, each message more desperate than the last. The Kalan were running out of time, and their faith in the warrior species of the third planet was all that kept them from complete despair. On the night before the Defiant was scheduled to arrive at New Sanctuary, David received the last clear transmission from the Kalan homeworld. It was different from the others, less structured, more emotional. Amy's translation came through with unusual clarity. "We see your ship approaching our dying world. We do not know if legends are true about your people. We only know that we are grateful someone heard our call. Whatever happens now, we are not alone in the darkness." David stared at the message for a long time, wondering if humanity was about to make first contact with a species that would already be extinct by the time the Defiant arrived. He also wondered if the ancient Watchers had been right about humans, or if they were about to discover that Earth's reputation was built on nothing more than primitive myths and wishful thinking. In 47 days, they would find out whether humanity deserved to be called the warriors of the galaxy, or if they were just another species stumbling blindly through the cosmos, unprepared for the horrors that waited in the dark between stars. The Defiant dropped out of hyperspace to find hell waiting in the Kepler system. Rick Torres felt his stomach drop as the sensor readings flooded his command screen. New Sanctuary hung like a wounded jewel against the black, its crystalline cities, still gleaming despite the massive ships that surrounded it like hungry predators. The planet was beautiful in a way that made human architecture seem crude by comparison, with flowing towers that seemed to grow from the landscape itself and great bridges of light connecting floating islands in the clouds, but the beauty was being systematically destroyed. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, turning sections of those magnificent cities into molten slag. The Dominion fleet consisted of vessels unlike anything in human design databases, angular and brutal, their dark hulls covered in what looked like decorative spikes and burning symbols. "Sir," Communications Officer Dave Kim called from his station, "I'm receiving multiple signals from the planet's surface. The translation software is working, but you're not going to like what we're hearing." Rick nodded grimly as the Kalan voices filled the bridge. They weren't military communications or evacuation orders. They were prayers, sung in harmonious voices even as their world burned around them. The aliens were facing extinction with a dignity that made several of his crew members wipe their eyes. Tom Park looked up from his engineering console with barely controlled rage. "Captain, those Dominion ships aren't even trying to defend themselves. They're just sitting there in formation, taking turns bombarding population centers. This isn't warfare, it's target practice." The first Kalan delegation met them in orbit, aboard a damaged civilian transport that barely qualified as spaceworthy. Elder Finn was tall and graceful, his iridescent skin shifting through colors that seemed to reflect his emotional state. Currently, those colors spoke of fear, hope, and desperate gratitude all mixed together. Healer Nova accompanied him, her large eyes filled with intelligence and sadness. Through the translation devices Tom had cobbled together from their linguistic databases, The Kalan leaders explained their situation with heartbreaking clarity. The Dominion of Ash was an empire that conquered worlds not for resources or territory, but for entertainment. They kept populations alive specifically to hunt them, turning entire civilizations into living game preserves for the amusement of their wealthy classes. "We are herbivores by evolution," Elder Finn explained, his translated words carrying undertones of shame that made Rick's jaw clench. "Our ancestors never knew predation. We built our society around growth and healing, never imagining that intelligence could be turned toward deliberate cruelty." Healer Nova showed them recordings recovered from other worlds the Dominion had conquered. Civilizations that had once built wonders across star systems were reduced to scattered tribes hiding in ruins, while alien hunting parties tracked them for sport. The hunters used advanced weapons but fought with arrogant carelessness, treating their prey as nothing more than animals. "The ancient ones who left ruins on our world wrote about your species," she continued. "They called humans the immune system of compassion, saying your people possessed a unique combination of protective instinct and tactical lethality. We did not understand what this meant until we studied your historical databases." Rick realized the Kalan had been researching humanity while waiting for rescue. They had learned about human wars, but also about human responses to genocide and oppression. They understood that humans fought differently when protecting others than when fighting for themselves. The demonstration of that difference came sooner than anyone expected. A Dominion hunting party, consisting of 6 armed aliens in powered armor, descended on the Kalan refugee camp where the humans were conducting their cultural exchange. The hunters moved with the casual confidence of beings who had never faced real resistance, their weapons powered, but their guard completely down. Colonel Beth Hayes and her 12 Marines were scattered through the camp, observing Kalan evacuation procedures and studying alien technology. When the Dominion patrol began herding civilians toward their transport ship, the Marines didn't hesitate. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. The Dominion hunters, despite their advanced equipment and physical advantages, were completely unprepared for human small unit tactics. Beth's Marines used cover, coordinated fire, and rapid movement to systematically dismantle the alien patrol. The hunters kept expecting their prey to run or hide, not to fight back with precise, overwhelming violence. When the last Dominion soldier fell, the surviving Kalan stared at the human Marines with something approaching awe. These graceful beings had watched their own people hunted for months without being able to fight back. Seeing their tormentors defeated so decisively by humans triggered an emotional response that needed no translation. Elder Finn approached Rick after the battle, his skin color shifting to patterns the translation software identified as deep respect mixed with hope. "Your warriors fight like the ancient writings described, not for conquest or glory, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We begin to understand why the Watchers called your species guardians." Dr. Lisa Wang spent hours examining the captured Dominion equipment and the bodies of the fallen hunters. What she found disturbed everyone who heard her report. The aliens were physically impressive, clearly evolved from apex predators, but their technology was designed for intimidation rather than efficiency. Their weapons were powerful but clumsy, their armor impressive but poorly distributed. They had grown soft from millennia of hunting prey that couldn't fight back. More disturbing was the psychological profile Lisa developed from studying their neural implants and personal effects. The Dominion species genuinely viewed other races as non-sentient animals. They felt no more guilt about hunting Kalan than humans felt about fishing. In their minds, they were providing a valuable service by culling weak species and testing the strong ones. As Rick prepared his final report to transmit back to Earth, he realized he was about to trigger the largest military response in human history. The message he composed was brief, but he knew it would change everything. First contact confirmed. alien species committing genocide for entertainment. Kalen are peaceful, advanced, and dying. Dominion views all other life as animals for hunting. They have never faced organized resistance. Recommend maximum response. We're staying to evacuate civilians and gather intelligence. Send everything Earth has. He paused before hitting the transmit button, knowing that once he sent this message, humanity would be committed to its first interstellar war. Then he looked at the tactical display showing Dominion ships casually bombarding Kalen's cities, while their hunting parties rounded up survivors, and his finger pressed the button without hesitation. 47 days later, Earth would respond. Rick just hoped there would still be Kalen alive to save when the cavalry arrived. 3 months after Rick Torres sent his desperate message to Earth, the space around New Sanctuary erupted with the fury of an awakened giant. Admiral Susan Blake watched from the bridge of the dreadnought Retribution as 200 human warships materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation. Each vessel represented the finest military engineering humanity had ever achieved. But more than that, they carried something the Dominion had never encountered: the collective rage of a species that had decided enough was enough. The Dominion fleet, which had been lazily bombarding the planet's surface in a leisurely genocide, suddenly found themselves facing an armada that had traveled across the galaxy for the sole purpose of ending their existence. The alien ships scrambled to form defensive positions, but their movements betrayed the same arrogant carelessness that had marked all their actions. They had never needed to worry about organized resistance before. "Ma'am," reported Commander James Wright from the tactical station, "enemy fleet consists of 47 capital ships and approximately 200 smaller vessels. They're moving to intercept, but their formation is completely inadequate for the threat level they're facing." Susan nodded grimly. The intelligence reports from the Defiant had been thorough. The Dominion fought like bullies who had never met anyone willing to hit back. Their tactics were designed for intimidation and overwhelming firepower against helpless targets, not for actual military engagement against a peer opponent. "All ships, this is Admiral Blake," she announced on the fleet-wide channel. "The beings on that planet have been hunted for sport by these animals for 3 months. They called for help, and we answered. Today we show the galaxy what happens when someone threatens the innocent within human reach. All batteries, open fire." The first exchange revealed just how unprepared the Dominion was for real warfare. Human ships moved in coordinated wolf packs, using electronic warfare to blind enemy sensors, while kinetic weapons and missiles struck with surgical precision. The Dominion vessels responded by firing massive energy beams in all directions, wasting power and revealing their positions to human targeting systems. Captain Alex Reed led the fighter squadrons in a series of attacks that would become legendary in military academies across the galaxy. His pilots flew in 3-dimensional formations that the Dominion couldn't track, appearing from unexpected angles to deliver devastating strikes before vanishing back into the void. The alien fighters, designed for atmospheric hunting rather than space combat, were slaughtered wholesale. But Susan knew the real measure of human superiority wasn't in their technology. It was in their ability to adapt and learn during battle. Engineer Sam Collins had been studying captured Dominion equipment for months, developing countermeasures and tactical recommendations that were already being implemented across the fleet. "Admiral," Sam reported from the Retribution's engineering section, "their shields operate on rotating frequencies to prevent sustained bombardment, but the rotation is predictable. I'm uploading timing data to all ships now." Within minutes, human gunners were synchronizing their fire to punch through Dominion shields during vulnerable moments. The aliens had never faced an enemy that could analyze their defenses and develop counters in real time during active combat. The space battle turned into a systematic dismantling of everything the Dominion had brought to New Sanctuary. Human ships that had been built for warfare against peer opponents proved devastatingly effective against vessels designed for hunting helpless prey. The Dominion's superior individual firepower meant nothing against coordinated human tactics that focused multiple ships on single targets. Dr. Lisa Wang, now serving as the fleet's xenobiology advisor, worked with Kalan scientists who had been rescued by the Defiant to understand Dominion psychology and biology. What they discovered explained everything about how the enemy fought. They're apex predators, Lisa explained to the senior staff, but they evolved in an environment with no real competition. They're used to being the only intelligent species on their world, and they've maintained that mindset even after achieving interstellar flight. They literally cannot comprehend that other species might be capable of organized resistance. This psychological blindness extended to their military doctrine. Dominion ships fought as individuals, each captain seeking personal glory rather than coordinating with their fleet. Their crews were trained for intimidation and terror tactics against helpless populations, not for the disciplined teamwork required in actual military operations. The breakthrough moment came when Susan ordered a direct assault on the Dominion flagship, a massive vessel covered in decorative spikes and burning symbols that served no tactical purpose. The ship's commander, a being the translation software identified as High Hunter Voss, had been broadcasting taunts and threats throughout the battle in the manner of a predator trying to frighten prey. Unknown species. Voss's message came through. The communication channels. You fight beyond your nature. Submit now, and we will make your death swift. Continue resistance, and we will hunt your young across the stars for 1,000 generations. Susan's response was broadcast across all frequencies, ensuring that every Dominion ship would hear it clearly. This is Admiral Blake of the Earth Defense Fleet. You hunt children for entertainment. You turn civilizations into game preserves. You mistake mercy for weakness and compassion for cowardice. Today you learn the difference between a predator and a warrior. We don't hunt for sport. We fight for justice. And justice has come for you. The destruction of the Dominion flagship marked the end of organized alien resistance in the system. Human boarding parties captured several smaller vessels intact, along with their crews and databases. The information they recovered painted a picture of an empire built on systematic cruelty that spanned dozens of star systems. But the most important discovery came from the personal logs of High Hunter Voss himself. The Dominion leadership had been aware of humanity for decades, dismissing them as another prey species based on their own limited understanding. They had planned to eventually visit Earth, confident that humans would provide excellent sport for their hunting expeditions. They were coming for us next, Susan realized as she reviewed the translated documents. After they finished with the Kalan, Earth was on their list. They saw our conflicts and wars as evidence that we were a violent species perfect for hunting. The Sao? Irony wasn't lost on anyone in the human fleet. The Dominion had marked humanity for extinction because they believed humans were naturally violent. They had never considered that human violence might be directed at protecting others rather than exploiting them. As the last Dominion ships either surrendered or were destroyed, Susan looked at the tactical display showing the rescued Kalan, transports, and the Liberation fleet that had traveled across the galaxy to save a species they had never met. The ancient Watchers had been right about humanity, but not in the way the Dominion had understood. Humans weren't violent by nature. They were protective by nature, and there was a universe of difference between the two. Over the fleet communication system, she heard Captain Torres reporting from New Sanctuary's surface. Admiral, we have 17,000 Kalan survivors, secured and ready for evacuation. But ma'am, we've got a problem. According to their databases, there are 43 other worlds in the same situation. The Dominion has been doing this for 3,000 years. Susan looked at her fleet, still intact after the most decisive victory in human history, and smiled, grimly. Earth had sent them to save one species from genocide. Instead, they had discovered an entire galaxy that needed liberation. All ships, she announced, prepare for extended operations. We have work to do. The liberation of the first Dominion hunting preserve caught the Empire completely off guard. General Mike Chen stood in the command center of the assault carrier Vengeance, watching real-time footage from the surface of Crimson Reach as his Marines stormed through what had once been the Dominion's primary military academy. The planet had been chosen as the next target precisely because it represented everything wrong with the Empire's philosophy, a world where young Dominion officers learned to hunt sentient beings as part of their military education. The battle for Crimson Reach lasted only 6 hours, but it sent shockwaves through every corner of Dominion space. For the first time in 3,000 years, someone had attacked the heart of their military establishment and won decisively. Colonel Anna Ross led the assault on the Academy's main complex, where human intelligence had identified holding facilities containing captured beings from 17 different species. What her soldiers found when they breached the walls would haunt many of them for years to come, but it also hardened their resolve beyond anything the Dominion could break. The hunting preserve system was even more horrific than the initial reports had suggested. The Dominion hadn't just conquered other worlds. They had transformed them into elaborate game parks where captured populations were forced to run and hide while alien hunters tracked them for entertainment. Entire civilizations had been reduced to scattered tribes living in constant terror, their technology stripped away, their children raised, knowing nothing but fear. "Sir," Anna reported to Mike over the tactical network, her voice tight with controlled fury. "We've secured the holding facilities. There are over 8,000 prisoners from dozens of species, some of them born in captivity and never seen their home worlds. The Dominion has been breeding populations specifically for hunting." Mike closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with the cold focus that had made him one of Earth's most effective generals. The intelligence they had gathered from captured Dominion databases showed that 43 worlds were currently under this systematic oppression. Each presented unique challenges that would test human adaptability in ways their military had never imagined. The aquatic world of Deep Current housed the remaining survivors of the hydros, a species of intelligent cetaceans whose ocean cities had been turned into underwater mazes for Dominion hunting submarines. The crystalline beings called resonants lived in the shattered remains of their silicon-based civilization, while alien predators tracked them through the ruins of their crystal forests. The Unity Collective, a hive-minded species, had been deliberately fragmented to prevent their telepathic coordination from spoiling the hunt. Each liberation required completely different tactics and technologies. Human engineers worked around the clock to develop underwater combat systems for Deep Current, modified energy weapons for the silicon-based environment of Resonant Prime, and psionic dampeners to help the Unity Collective reconnect their scattered minds without alerting Dominion hunters. But the real revelation came from studying the Dominion forces themselves. The Empire's military had grown complacent and arrogant over millennia of unchallenged dominance. Their weapons were designed for intimidation rather than efficiency, their tactics focused on terror rather than strategic objectives, and their command structure rewarded individual glory over coordinated effectiveness. "They don't fight wars," observed Dr. Wang, who had become the fleet's expert on Dominion psychology. "They conduct elaborate hunting expeditions with military equipment. They've forgotten what it means to face an opponent who can actually fight back." This fundamental misunderstanding of warfare showed in every engagement. Dominion forces consistently underestimated human capabilities, expected their enemies to flee rather than fight, and failed to adapt when their standard intimidation tactics proved ineffective. They were apex predators trying to hunt other apex predators, and they were completely unprepared for the experience. The liberation of Throne World, the Dominion capital, became the defining moment of the entire campaign. The massive planet city had never been attacked in its 3,000-year history, and its inhabitants believed their world was literally untouchable. The city's design reflected this confidence. with no real defensive systems and open spaces that prioritized intimidation over security. Mike personally led the assault on the Grand Coliseum, the vast arena where captured aliens were forced to fight each other for the entertainment of Dominion nobility. The building could hold 2 million spectators, and it had been full on the day human forces arrived in orbit. The sight of terrified beings from dozens of species being forced to kill each other while alien crowds cheered drove many human soldiers into a focused rage that made them nearly unstoppable. The storming of the Colosseum became one of the most documented battles in human military history. Combat footage showed human Marines moving through the arena complex like an unstoppable force, their faces grim with purpose as they systematically neutralized every Dominion guard and official they encountered. The Dominion defenders, many of whom had never fired their weapons at anything that could shoot back, broke and ran when faced with organized human infantry tactics. But the most powerful image from the battle wasn't of combat at all. It was the moment when 17,000 captive beings from 43 different worlds walked out of the arena's underground holding cells into sunlight, many of them seeing the sky without bars for the first time in their lives. The diversity of species was staggering. Some humanoid, others utterly alien, but all united by the experience of having survived systematic dehumanization at Dominion hands. The resonant crystals chimed in harmonies that spoke of joy beyond words. The aquatic hydros sang songs in frequencies that made humans weep without understanding why. The Unity Collective's telepathic voices rose in choruses of gratitude that touched the minds of every human in range. Species that had been reduced to prey animals remembered what it felt like to be people again. Anna personally arrested High Overlord Kor, the supreme commander of Dominion military forces, in his private box overlooking the arena. The alien had been watching the games when human forces breached the walls, and his first reaction was confusion rather than fear. He literally could not comprehend that someone was attacking him rather than fleeing from his presence. "You cannot be here," Kor said through the translation devices, his voice carrying the arrogant bewilderment of a being who had never questioned his own supremacy. "This is Throne World. We are the Dominion. You are prey species. This is not how the hunt works." Anna looked at him with the cold contempt reserved for beings who tortured innocents for entertainment. "The hunt is over," she said simply, and placed him in restraints that would carry him to a tribunal where 43 species would judge his crimes. The psychological impact of Throne World's fall rippled across the galaxy faster than news of the human fleet's movements. For 3,000 years, the Dominion had been the ultimate predators, the untouchable apex species that all others feared. In less than a year, humans had systematically dismantled their entire empire and proven that their supposed supremacy was nothing more than the arrogance of bullies who had never faced real opposition. Mike received surrender offers from 17 different Dominion colony worlds before the Throne World battle was even finished. These weren't military surrenders, but genuine attempts by local populations to abandon the empire before human forces arrived. Many Dominion citizens had never questioned their society's hunting practices, but seeing their military humiliated by the very species they had planned to hunt next forced them to confront the reality of what their civilization had become. Standing in the ruins of the Grand Coliseum, surrounded by freed prisoners from dozens of worlds, Mike realized that humanity had accidentally become something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that used superior military power to liberate others rather than to conquer them. The ancient Watchers had been right to call humans guardians, but even they probably hadn't anticipated that Earth would respond to first contact by declaring war on evil itself. The real work, Mike knew, was just beginning. 43 worlds needed to be rebuilt, their populations healed, and their civilizations restored. It would take decades of effort and cooperation between species that had never imagined they could work together. But for the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy had hope that intelligence and compassion could triumph over cruelty and oppression. 1 year after the first desperate signal reached Earth, representatives from 43 liberated worlds gathered in the crystalline halls of New Sanctuary for an event that would reshape galactic civilization forever. The Great Assembly, as historians would later call it, brought together species that had never imagined they could exist without fear. In the vast chamber that the Kaelin had built from living crystal, delegates sat according to their species' needs. The aquatic hydros in specially designed tanks, the crystalline resonance on platforms that amplified their harmonic voices, the gas-breathing ethereals in atmospheric suits that let them participate alongside oxygen-breathing species. Elder Finn, his iridescent skin now showing colors that the translation computers identified as deep contentment mixed with hope, served as the assembly's ceremonial host. But the real work of the gathering was coordinated by President Maria Santos, who had traveled from Earth to witness the signing of the Galactic Liberation Accord. 1 year ago, Maria addressed the assembled delegates, her words translated into 43 different languages and communication methods simultaneously. Your worlds lived under the shadow of systematic cruelty. Today, we gather not as victims and rescuers, but as equals, building a future based on cooperation rather than domination. The trials of Dominion war criminals had concluded just days before the assembly began. Elder Finn had served as chief prosecutor, presenting evidence of 3,000 years of genocide, torture, and systematic dehumanization with a dignity that impressed even hardened human military officials. The proceedings had been broadcast across the galaxy, ensuring that every surviving world understood exactly what the Dominion had represented. High Overlord Kor and his senior commanders faced justice from the very species they had hunted for: sport. The verdicts were unanimous, but the sentences reflected the civilized values of the liberated worlds rather than the cruelty their oppressors had shown. Imprisonment rather than execution, rehabilitation rather than revenge, justice rather than vengeance. Admiral Susan Blake, now promoted to head the newly formed Terran Protection Fleet, presented the military framework that would prevent future genocides. Haven Station, constructed from the wreckage of Dominion warships in orbit around New Sanctuary, would serve as the headquarters for a combined fleet of human vessels and ships donated by the liberated worlds. The protection fleet exists for one purpose, Susan explained to the assembly: to ensure that no species ever again faces extinction alone. We will not intervene in local conflicts or impose political solutions, but any attempt at systematic genocide or oppression of sentient beings will bring the combined response of every world in this alliance. The technological sharing agreements represented an unprecedented level of cooperation between species. Sam Collins, now serving as Chief of Interspecies Engineering, had worked with scientists from every liberated world to develop technologies that combined human innovation with alien knowledge. Medical advances from the Kaelin healers, crystal-based computing from the Resonance, and underwater engineering from the Hydros were being freely shared among all Alliance members. But the most remarkable development was happening in the field of xenolinguistics. Dr. Amy Foster's team had created a universal translation matrix that didn't just convert words between languages, but actually facilitated understanding between completely different forms of consciousness. The Ethereal's gas pattern communications, the Unity Collective's telepathic networks, and the Resonance harmonic crystalline language could all be understood by humans and other species for the first time in galactic history. We're not just talking to each other, Amy explained to the assembly. We're learning to think with each other, to share concepts and ideas that none of our species could have developed alone. The Cultural Preservation Project had become equally important. Civilizations that had been reduced to scattered survivors were being helped to rebuild their lost knowledge and traditions. The Dominion had deliberately destroyed libraries, museums, and cultural centers on every world they conquered, but the survivors carried enough memories to begin reconstruction. Dr. Lisa Wong led teams of anthropologists and historians working with each species to catalog and preserve everything that could be recovered. Languages that had been forbidden for centuries were being taught to young survivors who had never heard their ancestral tongues. Art forms that had been banned were being practiced again. Technologies that had been suppressed were being rebuilt and improved. The economic framework for the new alliance was unlike anything that had existed in galactic history. Instead of the Dominion's predatory system where resources were taken, by force, the liberated worlds developed a cooperative network based on voluntary exchange and mutual benefit. Each species contributed what they could produce best while receiving what they needed most. The Kalen's agricultural expertise helped feed recovering populations on devastated worlds. The resonance crystal technology provided computing power for massive reconstruction projects. The Hydro's underwater cities became models for sustainable living that could be adapted to dozens of different environments. Humanity contributed military protection and coordination, but also received knowledge and technologies that advanced human civilization by centuries. Rick Torres, now Admiral of the 1st Contact Division, established protocols for dealing with new species that might be discovered as exploration expanded. The lesson of the Kalen signal had been learned. Any call for help against oppression would receive an immediate response, but peaceful contact would be conducted with respect for each species' right to choose their own path. The memorial ceremonies, held during the Assembly's final day, demonstrated how much the galaxy had changed. On every liberated world, crystalline spires had been erected containing the original Kalen distress signal translated into all known languages. But these weren't monuments to suffering. They were celebrations of the moment when the innocent called for help and someone answered. The Unity Collective, their telepathic network restored and strengthened, created a shared memory experience that let every delegate feel the moment when human ships first appeared in their skies. The relief, gratitude, and hope of 43 different species merged into a single emotional crescendo that left many participants in tears. President Santos concluded the assembly with words that would be remembered by every species in the Alliance. The ancient watchers who observed Earth called humanity the immune system of compassion. Today we prove they were right, but not just about humans. Every species here has chosen compassion over cruelty, cooperation over domination, hope over despair. Together, we are all guardians now. The formal signing of the Galactic Liberation Accord took place as new sanctuaries' 3 suns set behind the restored crystal spires of the capital city. Each species signed according to their own traditions, the Kalen with harmonic frequencies that created patterns in living crystal, the Hydros with bioluminescent displays that painted the water tanks in brilliant colors, the resonance with crystalline chimes that resonated through the hall's structure itself. When the human delegation added their signatures to the accord, the assembled representatives fell silent. These were the beings who had traveled across the galaxy to answer a call for help from strangers, who had declared war on an empire they had never heard of because that empire tortured innocents for entertainment. The silence held for nearly a minute before erupting into the celebration of 43 different species expressing joy in 43 different ways. But the real transformation was happening on worlds across the galaxy, where the Accord's principles were already being implemented. Children who had grown up in hiding were learning to play in open spaces without fear. Scientists who had been forced to work as prey animals were rebuilding laboratories and pursuing research that could benefit everyone. Artists who had seen their culture suppressed were creating new works that blended traditions from multiple worlds. The Dominion's former slave worlds faced the biggest challenges. Generations of beings had been born into captivity, knowing nothing but fear and subjugation. Human psychologists worked with healers from every Alliance species to help these populations recover not just physically, but emotionally and culturally. It was delicate work that required patience and understanding, but the results were already showing in communities where former slaves were learning to make their own choices for the first time. The economic reconstruction proceeded faster than anyone had expected. Without the Dominion's predatory taxation and resource extraction, worlds that had been impoverished for centuries began to flourish. Trade routes that had been restricted to benefit Dominion hunting grounds reopened, allowing species to exchange goods and knowledge freely. The protection fleet conducted regular patrols throughout Alliance space, but their presence was welcomed rather than feared. Human ships worked alongside vessels from the liberated worlds, their crews learning to operate in mixed-species environments where every member brought unique capabilities to the mission. Captain Alex Reed, now commanding a squadron of fighters from 7 different species, described the change in a report that became famous throughout human space. We're not just defending these worlds anymore. We're part of them. The galaxy is becoming something new, something better than any single species could have built alone. The transformation wasn't limited to the former Dominion territories. Word of the Alliance's principles spread to neutral worlds that had survived by hiding from the Empire's attention. These species began reaching out cautiously, asking if the promises of cooperation and protection extended to civilizations that hadn't been directly oppressed. The answer was always yes. The Galactic Liberation Accord explicitly welcomed any species that shared its fundamental principles. The recognition of all sentient life as inherently valuable, the rejection of systematic oppression in any form, and the commitment to mutual defense against those who would threaten the innocent. Dr. Foster's translation matrices enabled contact with species whose forms of consciousness had previously been incomprehensible to other races. The Crystal Singers, beings of living mineral who communicated through geological timescales, joined the Alliance after human linguists developed methods for accelerating their communication to practical speeds. The Void Walkers, energy beings, who existed in the space between stars, provided insights into faster-than-light travel that revolutionized transportation for all Alliance members. Each new member species brought unique perspectives and capabilities that enriched the growing galactic civilization. The Alliance wasn't becoming a human empire or even a human-dominated federation. It was evolving into something unprecedented. A true partnership between radically different forms of life united by shared values rather than conquest or coercion. On Earth, the changes were equally dramatic. Humanity had gone from being an isolated species to serving as the military backbone of a galactic alliance in less than 2 years. The responsibility was enormous, but so were the rewards. Human science advanced exponentially through cooperation with species that had developed technologies beyond anything Earth had imagined possible. The psychological impact on humanity was perhaps even more significant than the technological advances. For the first time in their history, humans had definitive proof that their species' capacity for protective violence was not only valuable, but essential. The ancient human dream of being guardians and protectors had become literal reality on a galactic scale. David Reynolds, still monitoring communications from his post at the edge of human space, often reflected on how a single desperate signal had transformed everything. His discovery of the Kalen transmission had triggered a chain of events that reshaped galactic civilization, but he knew the real change had come from humanity's collective decision to respond with overwhelming force. To protect strangers, the memorial spire on New Sanctuary bore an inscription that captured the transformation perfectly. Carved in crystal that would last for geological ages, the words appeared in every language known to Alliance members. When the innocent called across the void, humanity heard and answered. When evil threatened the helpless, Earth's children struck back with righteous fury. When justice was needed, humans became its instruments. The hunt is over. The guardians have risen. The galaxy is finally free. As delegates from the Great Assembly returned to their home worlds to begin implementing the Accord's provisions, they carried with them something that hadn't existed in the galaxy for 3,000 years: Hope for a future where strength protected, rather than exploited, where intelligence served compassion rather than cruelty, and where the answer to a call for help would always be, "We are coming." The ancient Watchers had been right about humanity's role in the galaxy, but even they had probably not anticipated that Earth's response to first contact would be to declare war on evil itself and win decisively. The galaxy was entering an age where the innocent would never again face oppression alone, where justice was backed by the combined military might of dozens of species, and where the strongest commitment was to protect those who could not protect themselves. Humanity had found its place among the stars not as conquerors or explorers, but as the guardians the galaxy had always needed.